Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Gunnery Sergeant Reifke. I'm with the Marine Corps Tactics and Operations Group out in 29 Palms. Unfortunately, Staff Sergeant Wood was not able to make this meeting, but this was originally set up with Mr. Sebastian Bay through Major Malcolm to talk about the tabletop war game that we've created, which we've called Red Threat Rising. So tonight, what I'd like to talk to you about is kind of the history of the game, the purpose of it, our method, end state, the scenario that the game is based on, the game boards, the pieces, the connectivity of the game, and potential future for it. So going into this, we've been part of and observing the MWX, was the warfighting exercise that we put on out here every year, in terms of like force on force, and it allows people to exercise their command and control decision making against a live thinking adversary. And what we had seen through the trends was units could plan, but because through the steps of the Marine Corps planning process, typically due to time constraints, the wargaming step was skipped, which is really meant to stress a unit's plans and find those gaps and holes in it. So what McTogg wanted to do was develop an analog wargame that would help provide the units a low-cost tool to help address this issue, both low cost to manpower as well as fiscally. Only takes a handful of people to run and or play it, and it's low cost, print out the map boards, pieces, things like that. So getting into the purpose. So Red Threat Rising is actually a family of war games. Is to provide an unscripted event that offers, a wide variety of outcomes. At the end of the day, we give you a scenario, but whichever way you take how you are playing the game, every outcome can be different. But it's to test the decision making against another person, trying to abstractly approximate the friction, disorder, and uncertainty of combat operations. You're only getting certain pictures at a time based off of how far things are from each other, what you can see. Help employ the principles of maneuver warfare, conduct logistics in contested environments. So as far as logistics, and I can get into that when we get to the gameplay, it's abstracted. It's not like the sole focus of the game, but we do make you think about how you would do logistics in a contested environment during an engagement. And then this whole thing was built around the Army's TRADOC date world that they built. It's a bunch of fake countries put over different parts of the world. They built a lot of the backgrounds to the countries, so that we use that to help kind of just frame the world that we're playing in. So as far as the game, so we've actually got two games. One is the company level game, and it's to allow the leaders at company and below to practice both offensive and defensive tactics against a similar sized enemy. When we built this game, we actually based it off of a commercial game, Memoir 44. It was one of those, it was extremely easy to learn and play and figure out. But we wanted to take it and update the units and things like that. So instead of playing in the World War II scenario that's in, we're actually playing with modern equipment as far as the Marine Corps, and then based off the date world for the adversary. And then the battalion game is actually to provide staff the ability to conduct planning. So they have this scenario, they can take a day, 2 days, prior to, go through the Marine Corps planning process. And then once they've gone through the planning process, they can play it against an adversary that also planned and see if their plan would work. Obviously, they should have already gone through the wargaming step in McPeepee to help them stress their plan, find those branches and sequels. So when it comes to the execution of the Red Threat Rising game, they have those identified decision points and branches and sequels that they can then execute. And as far as connected, like, both the games are allowed to be played together. So I can have a battalion staff playing the battalion game with a company in another room playing the company game, and then the two will actually feed information back and forth to each other. So if I've got two companies playing against each other, the battalion can't actually control what those companies are doing on their map. They can just get information or push information and effects to them. So before we get into the method of the game, does anyone have any questions on the kind of the history or purpose of the game?
Doesn't look like we have any at this junction.
Good to go. So
Actually, sorry, 1 second. We do have one. We have one from Adam McCoy who asks, who typically plays the white cell for these games?
So currently, when we have played it, which has been semi-limited at this point, it was myself and Staff Sergeant Wood playing the white cell / referees and adjudicating the outcomes of the turns. But really, when it comes down to it, depending on if a battalion wanted to play it internal, whoever they pick that wouldn't be part of the planning process, they could have be the white cells for the games.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so as far as the method, so we went with a rigid Kriegspiel that is played in the double blind. So we wanted to take take it out of the referee's hands as far as like, oh, well, this going up against this, these are the guys, this is what the outcome will be. We sat down, lots of trial and error, actually using, again, Memoir 44 for the company's game, and Mr. Sebastian Bay's Littoral Commander for the battalion game as the like models we went after. Took some time and just went through it to see what would make sense with dice. Both games are played in the double blind. So obviously you've got the red cell and blue cell in two different rooms, with the white cell in a third, or depending on the size of the room, all in the same room, just whiteboards, walls, whatever, separating the sides from each other. The company game, however, can be played just like Memoir 44. You put the map down on the table with the ability to just play sitting across from each other. There are some slight modifications to the rules because obviously I know where everything is at that point. But it gives you a chance just to sit down, especially if you want some of your junior people playing it to sit there and work on their decision making and playing through different scenarios. So as far as the players, both sides, you can play with as few as one player all the way up to 8, which is really what a staff would have. The runners, 2 to 6, 1 for each red and blue. The reason we tend to have, we would say more on closer to the 6 is if you're playing both the battalion and company games together, then both battalion and company games each have their own runner from each side to the directors or referees. And then you can have runners that go between the battalion and the company. And then obviously each game will have its own referee. The turns themselves, we base them off of 1 hour. So we use the older company operations publication, which had the cross-country rate of a Marine under combat load as our basis for the turns. As far as the end state, so units, what we want is units to be able to conduct planning in a simulated environment, make decisions against the thinking enemy in an unbiased scenario. So at McTaw here, we have our advanced maneuver warfare course, which at the end of it, our operations and intel Marines come out with an operations and tactics instructor or intel tactics instructor, MOS, and this gives them a problem set to work through with their staffs during the Marine Corps planning process. But it also gives us a tool that we can take anywhere to help, coach, guide, and mentor the ITIs and staff, unit staffs in planning. And I say we can take it worldwide because it's, some 3D printed pieces, some dice, and a map, really low cost to take with us wherever we go, if that's what units want to work on. So is there what kind of questions do we have here before we get into this scenario?
We have a question from Gregory, who asks, how do your rules and mechanics account for chaos in the battle, that friction and like imperfect information?
So when you're playing the game, especially with it being a double blind with, the referees in one room, and then I've got my white or my blue and red cell in two separate rooms. Depending on how far they are from each other and hex spaces, and you can see it when we get to later slides with the map. I may only see one unit there when there's two or three other nearby, but they're just outside of my visual range, which, depending on the game, is like 2 or 3 hexes max. So I might be able to see something and I can't engage it, or if I'm using UAS, I might fly it. As a blue player, I might tell the runner I want to fly it across these hexes. As that's flying across these hexes, if there's a unit outside of 1 hex away, as the referees, I'm not going to tell them that that's there, because what we said was that was outside the visual range of the UAVs. Does that answer your question?
That answered the question. Thank you.
All right.
We have another question here asking, is it accurate to say that these games are meant to test staff processes and not necessarily focus on, quote, who shot John, saying who won or who lost, or testing and evaluating employment of new equipment?
So this one is more to test the processes. So especially with the battalion level game, they should be going through the Marine Corps planning process. And again, typically what we've seen across most units is, due to time constraints, the wargaming step in the process gets skipped, which is supposed to help stress your plan and identify gaps that you can then create branches and sequels to. So they should have gone through that whole process, and then they do this against a red cell that's also gone through planning. So it should be testing, one, their decision making, but also how well they did at planning, how well they did at identifying those branches and sequels in their plan, as well as going back to the beginning of, like, did I identify the right problem and come up with a good solution for it. At the end of the day, it's not well, I beat him, or this guy shot that guy. It's did you identify the right problem set, and did you plan accordingly to it and come up with the correct branches and sequels that if something different happens, I can react to it. All right. So as far as the scenario, again, this was built on the TRADOC date world. We focused in the Indo-Pacific area. So we used the Albanians, the Democratic People's Republic of Torbia, the Republic of Torbia, and then as well as ourselves, the United States. So the scenarios in 2028, we're saying a super typhoon made landfall on the island of Luzon, laid waste to the country, and it was one of the most powerful storms through that area for a long time, if not ever. After the typhoon went through, both the Republic of Torbia asked the United States for aid, as well as the Democratic People's Republic of Torbia requesting aid from Albania. And what we're saying in this is the Democratic People's Republic of Torbia was impacted, but where the typhoon went through, mainly the Republic of Torbia was the most affected by it, and then the Democratic People's Republic had some damage, but obviously nothing too significant. So then after that, observing the impacts that typhoon had on their southern neighbors, the supreme leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Torbia, since they had requested aid from the Albanian army, they decided they want to reunify their country and cross the border south. So this is where it gets into the actual game. So the battalion game takes place between the city of Tarlac, and then just south of the map is the city of Angeles, all on the island of Luzon. The provided scenario establishes obviously that red is moving south to seize the airport in Angeles, which is just off the map. The map itself is about a 25 by 45 kilometer map. And then within that, we have the company game. So the company game takes place in the city of Capas on the island of Luzon. So if I go back to the battalion game, it's the middle of the three cities on the southern part of the map. The game can be played as a standalone or mini game. So again, I can play this both as a double blind, just the company game with no effects on anything else. Or if I really wanted to, I could and I have a short amount of time, I can set the map out. I can have myself and someone else sitting across the table from each other and play it as a typical board game. Typical game scenario will have red beginning on the northern portion of the map with blue on the south. And this one's about a 5 by 25 or 5 by 2.5 kilometer map. All right. So getting into the battalion tokens. So these, if you're familiar with Mr. Bay's littoral commander, are fairly similar. Again, we use that as kind of a starting point for our game. The mechanics were fairly easy to use, and it made sense. So obviously on each token, we'll have the unit size up top, their designators, the type of unit in the middle, and then on the bottom, we have the different things in regards to what they can do. So, your on-road and off-road movements, how many hexes they can move, how many hexes they can engage, and how much ammo they have. So when it gets into the gameplay on this one, the ammo allocation, if I haven't had, like for the infantry units, if I haven't gotten into any engagement, I can roll up to 6 dice at one time. Now, however, by doing that, I no longer have enough ammo to continue the attack without getting some sort of resupply. So to resupply, I have, if you look at the one to the top right, that's our supply. So how much they can resupply, and then in the middle, it'll have both near and far resupply. So near resupply, they can come within 1 hex, resupply, and then the next turn, push back out. And then on the far resupply, they can resupply from 2 hexes away, but it takes a 1 turn effect. So they would have to sit there for 1 turn without being able to do anything. And then on the second turn, after getting resupplied, they can move away. The bottom left is our motor transport unit. So one, it can either move people, or we've given it the ability to conduct resupplies of other units. So you can use that to go back and forth between the supply units and then the units that are out engaged. The middle one, we have our UAS. So how far it can move per turn, how many turns it can be in flight, and then how far it can, the middle is saying how far it can go from its control station. And then the viewable distance is like, if it's flying over this hex, I can see that hex, but I can't see anything to the left and right of that hex. And then the final one on the bottom right is our organic precision fires, which is UAS with an explosive on it. So really the difference between that one and our UAS itself is, instead of distance from the control station, it just has to be within 6 hexes of a friendly unit. And then as far as the company game, tokens are a lot simpler. It's just the unit and the unit size. And then the last 2 on the far right is objective tokens. So whatever their objective for that mission is, whether it's seizing a bridge or a key intersection, that gets put down to start the game, and then you have to get a unit to it and hold that objective for 3 turns to collect it and say you've completed that objective. As far as the movement, range, and health, that is all on the player data cards. So for the infantry units, typically they have 6 health. They can take 6 hits. Their range, again, based off of memoir, if it's 1, I can engage up to 3 hexes out. If it's the next hex to me, I can roll 3 dice, and then as I go out, I can roll 1 less dice. What kind of questions do we have?
Yeah, so we have a few ones, just circling back briefly to the previous section of your presentation. We had a question about branches and sequels, and particularly how you integrated that with a multi-person and multi-level planning process, and what are some good examples of branches and sequels that emerged during that?
So branches and sequels. So while they're doing their planning, if they get, especially this will come out when they're doing the Marine Corps planning process is organic war game, which is not Red Threat Rising. They are sitting there talking through certain aspects of their operation. If they get to a decision point and it's like, hey, if I do this, the adversary does this, can I still accomplish my mission? If not, what is something else I have to plan to then to do so I can still accomplish my mission? A lot of times what comes out of the McPeepe's war game is their decision support matrix, which is is that if I do this, they do that. What is my next thing? And then by having that decision support matrix, when they go to play Red Threat Rising, when those things happen, they've already predetermined what their next step would be outside of what their original plan would be. Does that answer the question?
What sort of like just to kind of follow on, what sort of like written products come out of that?
So out of the McPeepee's war game would be the decision support matrix, which is easiest way to do it is if I do this, the adversary does that, and then what is the outcome? What is it that I have to do next? Would be the easiest way to explain it.
I think that answered the question. We have a few more about the specifics of the game. We have one question asking kind of what the hex size for the game at both the company and the battalion echelon is, and then also what is the time frame for each turn, roughly speaking.
Okay. So the hex size, it's been a minute since I looked at it for the battalion game. I want to say it was like 2.5 kilometers per hex. And for the company game, it's like 300 meters per hex. And then what was the second question?
What does each kind of turn or round correspond to in terms of real world time in a rough estimate?
So we've been playing around with it. Originally, we did not have any kind of time limits as far as like real world time associated with like, if I give you this information, how long do you have to come up with a decision to get back to the referees? But one of the things we talked about is from the time I give you the information till you have a decision back to me, something like 5 to 10 minutes to kind of really, probably closer to the 5 minutes to really start stressing that decision making on a compressed time frame.
We have one last question. How long does it take to teach people the rules for a new group? Do they play it once or do they play multiple short times, multiple iterations?
So the original plan was with us myself and Staff Sergeant Wood to be the referees, in which case we could teach the rules fairly quickly and be able to play the game like that afternoon. I think if we were to give the game to somebody, it might take them a day of reading through the rules and kind of playing the game to get a good understanding of it. But really within a day, for the battalion game, you should be able to play it fairly easily. The company game, it doesn't take long, especially if you're playing the face-to-face. You can sit there, have the rule book open, and be playing it at the same time. And usually after about the first time of playing through it, you've got a solid understanding of the mechanics to it. Playing it in the double blind can take a little bit more time, and that's because you're trying to make sure the referee as well as the runners understand the flow of the game, but typically within a day.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. No other questions then? So as far as the connectivity, so this is what I was talking about as far as I can play both games at the same time. So you would have your referees in the middle. This is depicting if it's all occurring in one room, or really in this case, 5 separate rooms. So I can have my battalion and companies in separate rooms. They can have audible communication, whether it be phone, Teams, radios, or the runners running back and forth passing information. But they can't physically see each other and see what's going on. And then from both battalions to the referee or both companies to the referee, you have your runners bringing the commander's cards of, hey, this is what they're doing. They're moving from this hex to this hex. They want to engage these individuals. And then the referees will adjudicate that. The referees absolutely should be talking to each other and seeing what's going on between the two maps, especially if the battalion, you're playing both the battalion and the company games, because the battalion might want to use their UAS assets to fly over an area in the company game, in which case the battalion will get fidelity of what is happening. But if they don't use the runners and or whatever kind of verbal communication they are using to pass that information down to the company still won't know or have a better idea of what's going on. So it forces that command and control to happen. Same thing with if the company's, progressing through their engagement. If they're not reporting back to the battalion that they need support or certain things are happening, the battalion won't have any idea of how to support them. And the battalions for both red and blue can shape what is happening on the company map, whether it be through artillery fires, or again, using that UAS to identify places where there's either gaps that the companies can exploit, or via using their precision fires to then strike at those identified areas. So this does have the potential to be played via either email or Teams. Staff Sergeant Wood did try this using a PowerPoint of the map with the game chips. They had it on Teams. They had it opened in the app, so where it's saving as you go. So I can move a piece, save it, send them a message like, hey, your turn. And then they would, he would go and save it. So we can see what is happening. Can be played with or without a referee cell, and really that referee is there just to roll the dice. You can play it without a referee if you're using a online number generator. If you give it the 1 to 6, so it's acting like a dice. It did take some work to get through it. It definitely was not as good as playing the actual game in person with runners and referees and whatnot, but it can be doable if you're in two different buildings on opposite sides of the base or however. But it does make it a lot harder. As of right now, there currently are no plans to make it a digital experience, despite having tried it on PowerPoint and Teams. Not to say that we can't do it in the future, but as of right now, we are not looking at doing the digital world with this. For the future, again, this is a family of war games. We've currently, again, got the battalion and company game. We've talked about building more, really being the information and influence, just how get units to think about like what can we do to help influence the populace to at the very least not be against us. We've also talked about the some sort of amphibious game. As of right now, we are not working on anything else. But those are ones that we've talked about to help simulate the modern and future conflicts at the tactical levels and through an analog experience. With that, what kind of questions do we have?
So this is a little bit more of a comment, but let me rephrase it as a question. Have you considering incorporating some sort of green cell in future iterations of the game? It's like a allied force.
Um, as of right now, no. One of the things we were talking about was green cell, white cell, was really that information and influence game. Hadn't really gotten past the idea of that's kind of where we were thinking we would go next, but not how we would go about creating that game yet. But it's definitely something we could explore.
Just a few, waiting for some more questions to show up here in the chat. I've got one for you as well. You mentioned that you looked at some commercial publications like Memoir 44, Littoral Commander, while you were designing this. Did you look at some of the in-house Marine educational war games, such as the Marine Amphibious War Game or any of that when you were going through the game development process? Or was it
Uh,
largely just in that commercial off-the-shelf space?
so this game was already being kind of worked on by Staff Sergeant Wood and Staff Sergeant Delacruz, who have both sent PCS to other units. Those are the ones that when I moved over to the emerging concepts and innovations branch, that they were using as the base. Staff Sergeant Wood has gone out and looked at the OWS and some of those other games, but as of right now, no. For these two games, those we just stuck with those really two commercial games.
So, still waiting on a few more questions. I'll ask one or two more. What has been the biggest challenge for you all in implementing this game? Is it the lack of game literacy, or is it uh, are there specific challenges in teaching the game that you're coming across? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So really our biggest challenge as of right now is we haven't really played it outside of McTog. We tried getting over to some of the local units to their internal war fighting societies, and as of right now it's just time working out like when they're available, when we have time with some of our other stuff not going on, that we can get over there and put it in front of some of these units to really, because there's still some we want to test and potentially make refinements to the game itself. But yeah, just getting it so that schedules align so that we can get to other units and play it.
And coming from somebody that works in wargaming with the Marine Corps, I know that people are coming in and out. You mentioned that some of the designers had PCS. How has that been a challenge to the development of this game and its continued development?
Yeah, so I mean it's obviously a challenge because especially if they are the driving force behind it, because we kind of split efforts. We all collaborate, but like Staff Sergeant Wood really took the lead with a lot of this game. So trying to keep pushing it forward, whilst I was there for a good majority of it, so I understand the game. But if we want to keep pushing it forward, making sure we get someone else that has the familiarity and understanding of the game to be able to progress it. So looking at some of the other games, trying to make sure we have other people involved in the design of it so that way it can get carried forward. But it definitely adds to the challenge of building a game with people coming and going, and either coming in when it's partway done and trying to get them familiar with it so that we can keep going with it, or someone that's intimately familiar with it leaving, trying to make sure that doesn't become a gap or a void that's not being filled.
Well, this question was very closely related, so I think you answered that one pretty well. We've got one more question here. Does the game have a higher headquarters order included in the info published with the battalions and companies, where they have to build their plan off of those missions and commander's intent, etc.?
So it's the battalion game has a loose order, I would say. It's not like a typical Marine Corps order, but it's like, hey, this is what your mission is, really a task and purpose. And it's really just to get them started with the Marine Corps planning process. And then the battalion, as they're coming through their planning, should feed their company or companies that are playing the game what their mission is, so they can do company level planning. If the company themselves are just planning, we built several I don't want to say scenarios in the rule book, but several scenarios where it's like, hey, here's roughly where your start points are for this scenario, and here's what your objectives are. Really just kind of letting the players work through, especially at the company. The idea was, that have them face to face and just work through decision making within a problem set.
Perfect. I think that is all the questions that we have, and I'll just turn it back over to you for any last comments or anything that you wanted to add on here. Also, tell us
No.
how we can get in contact with you if you have more questions later.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys letting me come and give this presentation to you guys. Obviously, as you can tell, a lot of hard work went into this from my Marines. So good to help get it out there some on top of what Staff Sergeant Wood and had been working on with getting it out there. As far as contacting me, you can always reach out to my email. Mr. Bay has it. And if not, I can definitely get it to him so he can get it out to you guys. This way, if you guys have any questions or whatnot in the future, it's there. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting me present this tonight.
Perfect. We're gonna